All right, welcome back to Moonstruck this week. I'm Ryan, your host, right here on Riot Radio, and today we're going to be covering a topic that is greatly covered in spirituality, as well as talking about some scientific principles that kind of relate and explain this concept, which we dive into in metaphysics. And we'll start by talking about constructive and destructive interference as a principle of physics and scientific phenomenon, and then we'll go into kind of the different aspects of some of the dimensions that we talk about in relation to space and time, such as the third, fourth, and fifth dimension, and kind of how time affects those dimensions differently. And then lastly, we'll get into the scientific, or rather spiritual phenomenon known as the eighth sphere, which we can see up there in the first image, which is kind of this sphere that is in alignment with certain planets and kind of projects over the Earth for this specific epoch in earthly history. So maybe first we'll just start by talking about kind of why is this important that we understand how things like frequencies and stuff affect not just how we live our life, but how really things play out in reality. And one of the things we'll talk about is, for example, if you make a noise, like suddenly, like bang your hand on something, or you hear a loud noise across the room, you suddenly become aware of that thing. Something instinctually in your biology or physiology tells you that I need to be aware of abnormal changes in the environment because it is a human instinct that has existed throughout time, right? So when we talk about those kind of concepts and really paying attention to the environment around us, we really are talking about not just things in physical nature, such as somebody, having contact with a table, but also the energies that surround that, right? For example, we're talking about sound being reverberated through a surface. We're talking about different light frequencies. If you're driving late at night and you see a high beams of a car coming in another direction, you pay attention to that because you want to make sure that, okay, this person's driving on their side of the road, I'm driving on mine. That's paying attention to environmental stimuli. So it's not just about physical things such as, people moving around or perhaps different sounds or energy moving around, the environment, but also things subtle like light and sound, and really everything we see around us incorporates into that phenomenon of paying attention to your environment and really how those frequencies can interact with your nervous system. So when we talk about this in relation to the human body and in relation specifically to the mind, as we talk about subconscious a lot and how that affects how our life plays out and different modalities we can use to kind of help us reprogram that to shape the life we want, we are talking essentially about creating good repetitive patterns or frequencies or rhythms in the body that the nervous system can essentially recognize, right? And how we do that is really by things like hypnosis or meditation, self-talk, or just communication in general with outside people. Everything you say around you is a form of hypnosis because you are conveying information and you are projecting expression out into the world. And you pay attention to these things because you are, or subconsciously at least, you pay attention to it because it's really a part of you that you are projecting out into the cosmos. You are projecting your will or projecting a piece of your expression out there. So it's important that we pay attention to these things. And really, when we do that internally, we are creating what we talk about in personal development as self-talk, right? And self-talk is important because it really reflects what your habits and rituals will convey out into the expression of the world. So if your self-talk is garbage, then you are going to have a problem, because you're not going to be able to express yourself and convey yourself in a way that properly demonstrates your capability. So when we include stuff like, for example, they talk about in New Age a lot, binaural beats or frequencies, different types of brain waves, delta waves, theta waves, that people may help them to go to sleep or relax or put their brains in certain states of focus or concentration, whatever. We are ultimately entraining our brain on a frequency that aligns with the goal that we are setting out there, whether that may be to reprogram the mind or to achieve deep states of relaxation or altered states of consciousness, what have you. So when we talk about these concepts, we're really talking about creating constructive interference in the body, and that affects the central nervous system through sensory perception like hearing, which we're obviously aware of, visualization, which is a thing they talk about a lot in metaphysics. And one of the reasons why that's so important is because everything you imagine is essentially projected out into the cosmos in some degree. And it has a reason for being there. Normally human beings have a lot of random thoughts throughout the day, but ultimately all of those thoughts are essentially reflective of some part of your consciousness. So if you can learn to influence the thoughts that you project out there, you can be more decisive with how you move through the world and be more conscious of the energies that you're putting out there and interacting with. So, in terms of constructive interference, what does that mean? Neuroscience shows that essentially it takes 30 days after repeating a behavior to form what we call a habit, or essentially a software program in the brain that will play on autopilot. Because neuroscience also shows that as human beings, we only use about 1 to 5% of our consciousness throughout the day. Most of our life is lived unconsciously, and it's shown that, 95 to 99% of the neural activity in the brain is actually subconscious throughout our daily life. So 1 to 5% of the processor in the brain we are using to influence the world we see around us. And if that 95 to 99% is filled up with garbage and clutter and information you don't need, then you're essentially, think about it like this. You're a computer and you're clogging up the hard drive with a whole bunch of garbage stuff that you don't need. And essentially, if you clear off that hard drive, you are freeing up storage for you to pay attention to things that actually matter. So when we're talking about moving consciously and paying attention to the environment around us and absorbing information that aligns with our goals, our greater aspirations, then we're talking about paying attention to the constructive interference that is around us, especially in relation to how that aids us. So we want to make sure we're creating constructive interference around us, which is beneficial or aligned with our intention. Ultimately, there's an effect that is contrast to that, which is known as destructive interference. And you can almost think of these two phenomenons like ripples in a pond. If you have one wave going up and one wave going down in the pond of the same frequency, science says is that those two frequencies will cancel each other out. But if you have two frequencies that are resonating together in the pond and they hit at the same time and both are going up, essentially what that creates is is referred to as constructive interference. And what that means is the waves are combining their energy to produce a wave that is of higher energy or magnitude, and that will essentially ripple throughout the pond or the medium and reverberate it to a higher extent than it would be if there was no constructive interference and there was just one splash. So you want to make sure that the splashes you make in your pond are ultimately for your highest benefit, right? So we're going to kind of maybe bring up an analogy into this. You can almost think about the body, the central nervous system, as a combination of elements. I don't know if we could get image number 3 up. vertical one with the, yeah, that one. We'll keep that up. So I don't know if you guys could see up there at the very top, but there's the 4 elements up there, essentially water, air, fire, and earth, around the central astral or higher astral dimension that is put up there. And the reason why this is important is because these elements work in cohesion with one another and work in harmony. And when they are in harmony, it creates a balance in which you can express different aspects of life and, learn things or demonstrate things through the body, spiritual phenomenon such as transmutation, which is sometimes talked about when, that's good. I like that. So transmutation, for example, which is the ability to transmute energy or change energy from one form into another, which greatly relates to the concept, which we have not talked about on the channel yet, but it's a big concept in physics when we talk about nuclear fusion and nuclear fission, right? And the reason why nuclear fusion and nuclear fission is an important concept to understand is because when we talk about fusion, we're taking 2 things and making them one. So it's a little bit more in-depth than that, but the basis of the concept is we're talking about separating energy and combining energy. So understanding that these 2 principles are fundamental, and though they take place in the stars and in fission reactions that we use to power the grid, the important thing is that they can take place really anywhere in the cosmos at different levels of intensity. So when we talk about transmutation, a similar phenomenon is actually going on when that happens in the body. So, for example, we'll depict it with maybe the energy of water and wind. And water we can refer to as, the sacral center, which is, near the just below the plexus and above the root center, in the middle of the navel, and it's depicted by the element of water. And when we talk about wind, that is depicted by the heart center, which is the anahat center, as referred to in Hindu philosophy, and referred to as the unstruck center. It's the center of wind in the body, and it relates closely with the soul and the activity of the heart. And when these 2 are in congruent motion, or they're flowing in unison, both the flow of water and the movement or rhythm of wind, you essentially get this effect of almost what happens at sea. You get the energy of the water being siphoned off by the wind. And during transmutation, where there's the element of fire in between at the plexus, that's the force which essentially acts as a transmuter for these forces which we want to detoxify from the body and transmute out with the power of the breath. And sometimes this activity is or phenomenon or whatever practice you would refer to as pranayama in some philosophies such as Hinduism, right? So we can see how this really affects how we ascend as a spiritual being. And kind of going more into how this really relates to essentially the different aspects of life in terms of bettering yourself or creating change within yourself. The important thing is that you can find a way to create change, and change is a process, kind of like what's going on here. It's an alchemical process that takes place in how you view the world, and how you view the world can be expressed through these different elements of the body and different frequencies or different phenomena such as constructive interference, which at lower frequencies are drowned out by. And essentially, when it comes to the puddle of life or the pond of life, its most intense frequency wins. So when you understand that the most intense frequency is going to be the one that dominates the rest of them and really takes hold over what is projected into the environment, then you will become more conscious and pay attention to the things that are influencing you to think in certain ways. in relation to kind of going into the body and how this really plays out with the earth as also a aspect of the body, because typically we think of the earth as something completely separate from us, which we should learn not to do. And I myself am guilty of this to some degree, but understanding that we are really interconnected and interpenetrated by this base or mountain, enormous marble, a mountain of a marble, or marble of a mountain, whatever you want to call it, of rock that basically stands beneath us. It has energy, right? Because as we know from physics, gravity waves are emitted into the cosmos by masses that hold large enough mass to influence the surrounding nature of the fabric of reality. So when we talk about things like very dense forces like gravity acting as almost a center of energy, which is everything is being pulled to the core, there is also a force that is, keeping us walking around, because we can overcome that force to a degree in which we're able to move. And essentially why this is important is because it acts as a grounding mechanism, or almost like a lightning rod, in which energy is then dispersed into the earth. And when this happens, we realize that we are not separate from this mechanism, or this object or creature rather, which we are walking around on, because the earth is living and breathing just like us. It might not breathe in the same way that we do, and it might act as more of a collective medium for all of us to interact with, but it is certainly emitting energy that does connect all of us. And it is shown in science, it's shown in the CIA document that we reviewed in the first episode, that the magnetic fields of the heart and the mind interact and interpenetrate with the fields of the earth. And when you are in heart coherence and bilateral brain state combined, that field can project over the entire earth. So we are talking about electromagnetic fields projecting over the earth, and which kind of takes us into the process of change and the different epochs of history affecting these spheres. And this is really where we get into the aspect of the lower astral plane, or the eighth sphere, in which is the shadow aspect of reality that is projected upon the earth for a time, in which humanity is really encountering the shadow aspect of the self. And we've talked a lot about shadow and ego on the channel before, and really why this is imperative in relation to what we see up here in this diagram is because, here we see the astral, the upper astral plane, and we see the material plane, and, we see the forces of light and dark on either side. But what we want to pay attention to is, down in the abyss, or what's sometimes referred to as the lower astral plane, that's where all the murky stuff that, when we talk about transmutation, that we want to transmute out from ourselves, because ultimately the cosmos is in some form, whether we realize it or not, a reflection of ourself. So all these different aspects of life which we see around us are, it's almost like looking in a funhouse mirror sometimes, where you look at reality and reality is reversed or distorted in some sense, but it's ultimately reflective of something. We're talking about the same kind of concept here when we talk about what dwells in the abyss, or what dwells in the lower astral or eighth sphere that we need to transmute past. And this dimension, in relation to the other realms, such as, the mental, the causal plane, and all the higher realms that are more associated with cosmic unity and evolution of the soul, are this realm, this lower realm, essentially acts as almost purgatory, where we go during sleep unconsciously, because we're not trying to do things like be aware during our sleep, such as lucid dreaming or astral projection or what have you, which are all consequences of being conscious during the activity of dreaming or sleep, or REM sleep to be specific. And these activities such as lucid dreaming, well, specifically astral projection, can be, accessed in different brainwave states, not necessarily only REM sleep, and they are transferable between different states of consciousness. Lucid dreaming usually occurs during REM sleep, so that would be the key difference. But essentially, this is where we go when we're very unconscious of what is going on in the environment, and we're not paying attention to where we are when we're dreaming, or we're not trying to actively be conscious or find ways to exercise our consciousness during its recharge period. And the reason why we should pay attention to these things is because I was saying this in a conversation I was having yesterday with somebody. The body, or the day before yesterday, the body may need sleep, but the consciousness does not. It's pure energy. So, the body can fall asleep, and you could, the muscles can recover from the gym or whatever, and you could go flying off in your dream and, do all sorts of crazy stuff. So it's not imperative that you really make that about recovering in some sense from the activities of the day, because your consciousness is connected to infinite energy out there. So exercising that is really the way to tap into the potential and the ability to do that. So the other things that we'll talk about in congruency with kind of some of these principles around, obviously in the abyss we see this is mainly focused on the concepts of power and aspects of fear or sexuality, which are more dualistic in nature in terms of how they connect with physical reality. And the reason why these are kind of lower forces which are dominant in these areas is because they are usually one-directional forces, right? They are things that are deeply ingrained into the psyche of human beings. Since the beginning of time, human beings have been or aware of their environment as a result of the instinct of fear, or some aspect of maybe not necessarily fear, but conscious awareness as a result of being in a state of hypersensitivity to the outside environment, such as a predator being nearby or something like that. Something that makes you really say, okay, I got to pay attention to what's going on around me, because I don't want a saber-toothed tiger to run up on me. So you got to pay attention. And, procreation, another thing that is deeply ingrained into the human psyche. And, we can see this with all the garbage going on the internet these days, such as, OF and all that other trash. So we can really see how these things always have their way of smuggling themselves into the human psyche and trying to invade, really, your consciousness's ability to focus on things that are more aligned with your soul or your individuality outside of those primal forces. And it's really imperative that we understand these things and don't sugarcoat it, because when you sugarcoat things, or you try to make things about oh well, we can only talk about the stuff that is lighthearted and fuzzy, you don't really get the full picture now, do you? And when we talk about self-development and self-expression and personal growth, we need to get the whole picture, else we're really not doing ourselves any justice by turning a blind eye, are we? So understanding that a whole picture view is imperative in these cases to actually understanding what our consciousness is capable of, not just in hindering us, but in helping us as well, which is what we're trying to focus here on this channel. But again, you need that big picture view, and you can't, paint things over with a fuzzy image and pretend that stuff doesn't matter, because it does, whether you realize it or not. First rule when it comes to bettering yourself is be aware of everything, and then discern what it is you want and what it is you do not want. but if you're not first aware of something, you cannot be something. So next, we'll move on to a predominant law in the cosmos, and this is really talked about in spirituality these days, and metaphysics, and especially when people talk about like, oh, I want to manifest and blah blah blah, and whatever. We're talking about the law of vibration versus the law of attraction. And the law of attraction is something that people have kind of misinterpreted a little bit, and we're really talking about two independent laws here. And the first law of the cosmos, and you can see this in you could go look into things like concepts talked about by like Bob Proctor and whatnot, where he talks about how to attract wealth, or how he talks about how to build a healthy habit in the mind. But we are essentially talking about two independent principles of the cosmos, and one is the law of independence and the law of magnetism. And these two work similarly but independently from one another. Actually, they do work in cohesion with one another, although they are two separate laws and they need to be understood differently. And that's what I mean by they work separately. So first law of vibration, means that whatever you are resonating at, whatever song or tune your symphony of spirituality is playing inside of you, such as what you want to attract, what your soul is in line with, what you're attracting to you in physical reality, that is the law of vibration, because you're resonating on a frequency that is playing a song that is shaping how reality plays out for you. And that is vastly different than the law of attraction, which is based around what you are attracting when you're holding one half of that consequence. So when we talk about law of attraction, we're now talking about the law of magnetism. We're talking about two polarities that are attracted to one another, or rather electromagnetism, if you want to say. So you can almost think about it, if the goal is for you to create electricity by essentially having one half of what it takes to create electricity, you can think about it as, I have a positive charge right here in my hand. I want to attract wealth or success or power or whatever it is. And that means that whatever negative charge is associated with that out there, I need to bring it to me. Because if I'm going to create electricity, if I'm going to gain the energy out of associating with the combination of those two forces, then that means I need one half of that energy. It means that I need the opposite or counter polarity to whatever I'm trying to attract. So that's really the ultimate explanation of this law of vibration versus the law of attraction. We're talking about two different laws of reality, one based on vibrational frequency, or a song that is being played, and I refer to it as a song because essentially that's what a song is, a combination of different frequencies that are very specific and play a very specific tune and make you feel a very specific way. And everything that likes that song or likes that frequency or resonates at the same frequency, all the plants and animals and all the things that are living beings, or even inanimate beings like rocks, they will all resonate to that tune because they are playing the same song. But if they are not playing the same song, then you do not have that effect. So, and only the things that are attracted to that song, or only the things that are resonating with that song that you are playing, will be attracted to that, right? So we're talking about kind of two different concepts here, and I can't really stress enough how independent these are from one another when we talk about the concept of individuality in what you are, and something that externally from yourself, or yourself in this dimension anyway, something you have or possess, such as a mental aspect of something you're trying to achieve. For example, if I'm trying to build a business and I don't think like a business person, then I got a big block. Or I don't think in terms of, well, how am I going to, make income, or how am I going to determine what is profit in from profit out, or whatever aspects of business we're talking about. If I'm not thinking about things in terms of marketing, how to market a product, in terms of, how I got to manage finances, then I'm missing one half of that equation, because the outside circumstance is not played out yet, but I haven't got the charge, which is non-physical, which I can acquire from anywhere by learning it from someone else or from the internet, or from whatever AI you have access to nowadays that can teach it to you probably. So if I'm missing part of the information that attracts that one half, the external circumstance that transpires, then I'm missing one half the equation. So this is the law of attraction and the law of magnetism or electromagnetism in terms of attracting things to you. And we're not going to get too episodic here, but what I'm really trying to emphasize is that to change yourself into something, you are dealing with the law of magnetism in terms of you're attracting something material that is something that you can see in your mind, something that is outside of what you determine yourself to be. Something as physical as, say I want another mic here, another mic beside me or whatever, I have to first picture how I'm going to get that, or picture what are the steps, or what things do I need to do in order to work to achieving whatever goal that is, right? So it could be building a business, could be whatever, but you have to have certain mental processes that are going on. You have to have that electrical charge going on to attract that thing to you. If I want to take a trip and I don't have a map, then how am I going to get there? So you have to have the map, is essentially what the law of attraction is. And when we get into kind of the eighth sphere and how does this interplay with all these things, and how's the shadow really, involved in this, Ryan? Like, okay, we get, law of attraction, law of vibration, but, how is this extra dimensional force seen in this abyss actually impacting our life? Well, if you think about all the memories or all the aspects of reality or all the experience you've had in life, or the things that you can see in your mind that are affecting you and either holding you back or, causing you to be disrupted in your consciousness or clarity of thought, they are essentially residing here in this like really purgatory dimension of reality, where all the discoherent vibrations of the universe get trapped. It's almost like a recycling dimension where the energy is recycled, and there's this big electrical field around this time or epoch of the earth, which is supposed to be projected over the earth during this period, and it's amplified by all these external frequencies now that we have in reality, 5G, Wi-Fi, satellite, all these abnormal frequencies that did not exist here at the beginning of time, impacting the bioelectric field of the earth, which is, in the beginning of time was pure, and, we were all just conscious beings. There was no electric devices or artificial phenomenon impacting the Earth's electric field. But now we got this overemphasized electromagnetic field that is electrically charging the Earth. And if you want to go into, Lucifer and Ahriman and all those forces of spirituality, which are really aligned with the eighth sphere or lower astral plane, which seeks to project this energy over the earth and seeks to disrupt you from your spiritual path, then I encourage you to look into those works, because it does really impact how you interact with your spirituality. And if you're not paying attention, if you're not conscious of that, it can stray you from the path. So this is why in so many of these mystic schools and mystic teachings, they really emphasized not getting too sucked into the eighth sphere. And there's a whole bunch of things that can exist here: trickster entities, jinn, ghosts, whole bunch of like paranormal or lower entities get trapped here. And if you're not careful, you can be interacting with them posing to be some higher spiritual being. You might interact with some force claiming to be Archangel Michael, but really it's a jinn just manipulating you and trying to leverage himself into your consciousness, or trying to use you as a medium to project into this dimension. So that can really stray you from your path. And I know this is kind of out there in the concepts that we usually talk about on this show, but understanding that these frequencies or these entities do exist out there, and if you're not aware of it, it could be a barrier in your spiritual path. So understanding that there are ways to overcome that and move up to those higher planes of existence, such as the higher astral plane, or the mental plane, or the causal plane, where the Akashic records are stored and where higher information is stored, then you can be in harmony, just like the four elements up there, right? So understanding that tuning your vibrational frequency to what you want and to what is actually aligned with yourself is imperative for understanding where you want to go, right? And you don't want to get sucked into this kind of purgatory dimension where all the jinn and trickster entities and discoherent vibrations exist, because that is a very bad neighborhood in terms of where you go when you're dreaming. So the only two really bad, or I don't like to use dualistic words like good or bad, but in terms of describing what this place is, the only two lower dimensions really out there are the lower astral, which all these forces reside, which is basically purgatory. It's like hell, but you can get out of it if you're conscious, or this dimension, because we got a lot of problems here in the physical dimension. And you can see up there material world right above the abyss, so very close to it. And essentially what happens during this process of the eighth sphere is the earth is almost going through a mitosis or metamorphic process, which the dimensions are branching off from each other, and eventually they will separate completely, in terms of separating into a higher sphere and a lower sphere. But essentially you can almost think of it like mitosis or cell division, in which the spheres are starting to separate and they're starting to really change the form that they take on. Yeah, you can see here, see the eighth sphere is projected over the earth in this period, right? You see the alignment of all the planets, and then eventually we will move through a period where the eighth sphere is no longer projecting over the earth, and that will eventually lead to another epoch in spiritual evolution, which we can ascend to a higher state of consciousness. So maybe we could go back to the last image actually, and yeah, so as we can see, you got the abyss, you got hell, and as I like to refer to it, purgatory, because there's always a back door, which is consciousness, and usually is always the same answer. You just need to be aware of what is going on around you and understand how to navigate that within the parameters in which you are able to accomplish. And when we talk about really the impact of these on the planet, we're talking about changing yourself first. Change the reality that you are on, because essentially there's all sorts of things always going on, such as we talk about quantum leaping, or the ability to tunnel through dimensions, essentially when you get to a high enough state of consciousness in which you realize that all the aspects or versions of Earth that are typically described in the multiverse theory are already theoretically in existence. The ability to tunnel through them just relates to you being at a high enough dimension. So after that, no, we'll stop there in terms of that subject, and maybe we'll just actually sum up here in terms of the process of really how water and wind kind of relate to this phenomenon, because when we're talking about getting up to those places where everything's aligned and everything is nice and whatever, and you got freedom of consciousness, and the lower entities are down there doing their dance, and you're up here like singing your song or whatever, playing a nice tune, then we're really talking about the ability for you to exercise your independence in these higher dimensions. And the third one, when we leave through the third center, one that is time constraint, which is typically related to the solar plexus, then you are under the constraint of time and the dynamics of time rules. So that's why they say third dimensional, fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional. Fourth dimension is where the Akashic records are stored. This is above the mental plane, and this diagram might not show it exactly or whatever, but essentially it's the Anahat center where time originates at. And fifth dimension is above that, where you got the kind of spiritual dimension where you are free from the constraint of time overall, and information such as the past, present, and future all merge into one, and they're traversable. So understanding that time rules do not apply in some of these dimensions, and when you leave through the third center, when you leave through the solar plexus during sleep, you typically go to this lower astral plane. But if you could leave through the higher centers of the body, if you could leave through the crown center, then you could go to the upper astral, you could go to the mental, you could go to the causal, and you can avoid being dragged or sucked down into this unconscious dimension of purgatory, essentially. So understanding that it really comes back to consciousness and determining how you want to express life. And the relationship between water and wind comes into this because it creates a harmony, or a harmony of our harmonic symphony, essentially, in which you are, how would I describe this? Creates a harmonic symphony in which you are playing your tune. You're playing your tune in relation to water flowing with neat tides and the wind breezing at just the right speed, and essentially what happens when you have this I might be getting a bit episodic here. I don't know if the point is really getting across, but I think that essentially when you have a nice tide, or when you're swimming in the ocean and the water is calm and the water is clear and you got nice blue seas, and the wind is blowing at just the right speed, so it's not too cold and you don't have a wind chill, and it's breezing at just the right speed to play a nice song in terms of the tides, because ultimately the wind is the thing that creates the tidal force and where that energy is generated from. And when those two are in perfect unison together, you got this nice song being played of cosmic energy. And essentially that is what is going to transfer into your process of ascending and transmuting forces within you to actualize yourself to a different potential in the field. And I don't say higher potential, because you can transmute it in any way you like. You can transmute it and decrystallize parts of yourself. You can recrystallize things or rematerialize things in terms of what exists inside of you, either mental blocks or physical constraints or whatever. You can transmute them It really comes down to how much energy you're putting in, how much energy it takes to achieve the thing that you want. When we talk about these concepts, we're always dealing in terms of the cosmic unit of finance, which is energy. Energy is like the money of the universe. So, and the more energy you have, the more money or things you can exchange in the universe. So, or in your consciousness. So maybe we won't drag it out much longer. I really wanted to sum that up in terms of how these concepts really play into each other, and get it across that there are these different rules in reality, and different aspects of how we approach things like sleep, and what laws apply to that, and what things we should be aware of. And ultimately, this is a learning process, and I myself am even learning to exercise some of these things to a better potential. So, by no means does anybody always have it figured out, but the idea here is that by being conscious, you can exercise little changes in reality and within yourself. And eventually, on a long enough time span, whatever changes you make in terms of your life, whether that be changing a lifestyle or spiritual belief or a mental pattern or however you want to phrase it, on a long enough time frame, you will be successful. If you really believe in that thing, if you really inside of yourself, if you truly believe that no matter what happens, you are not going to give up, and whatever blockages come in your way, then they will essentially get smited down by your force of will. On a long enough time frame, you will be successful, because it really comes down to, do you have enough energy or universal cosmic currency to get that which you are aspiring to do, or really exchange for what you want? That's the first thing. The second thing is, are you consistent enough over a long enough time span to get it, right? So human beings didn't always have, these linguistic skills since the beginning of time. They had to start off grunting for a while before they can come up with English. And it was a long, long time, over a long enough time span. We are here, and I'm doing a show in front of a thing called a camera because some other human being in the past was able to manufacture such a thing. So, but if there was a time before when we couldn't even fathom English, or we couldn't even fathom communication outside of grunting around a cave fire, then I don't think there's much we can't fathom in terms of our ability to express consciousness and to evolve as a being of Earth. So, again, I don't mean to go over the edge here, but I just want to express to you how much of your consciousness is actually malleable, and how much you can actually change your ability to express life and interact with the field around you. So perhaps we're going to sum it up here, because I've seemed to be on too long today, and I don't want you guys to be dozing off at this point during the show. So I'll sum it up here. We covered the law of vibration versus the law of attraction. We've covered the eighth sphere and the lower astral plane, and how these forces really interact with the environment around us, and how the hyper projection of the shadow can influence and affect our life, take us off balance through the influence of these lower entities, which seek to divert us from the path that we should be on. We talked about the concept of materialism in duality, and we've talked about the aspect of sexuality and fear, or conscious awareness of the environment to a degree in which we can pay attention to it regarding predatory instincts of survival. So we covered a lot today, and we also covered the third, fourth, and fifth dimension in terms of time rules, constructive, deconstructive interference. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to, can you be conscious of and aware of enough things to better your life? And I think that is a difficulty for most people because deep within themselves, they don't believe it's possible in the first place. And to do anything, you have to believe it's possible, and you have to aspire to that, and you have to be essentially infatigable. You have to have an unlimited source of energy. So I encourage you to pull from the void of energy. When you go to the gym and you can't get that last rep out and you pull from the void, that's what we're talking about here. So that void is always there. It comes down to, can you utilize it to the potential that it was made to be utilized from? So we're going to sum up there today. This has been Moonstruck right here on Riot Radio. I'm your host, Ryan. You can follow me on Instagram at top_sorcerer or top_sorcerer. I encourage you to like and subscribe, interact in the comments section, because, we need to build up this community and start talking about some crazy stuff on the channel that relates to all this stuff going on in the different epoch periods of the earth. And, there's some people like me out there who just want to geek out on this stuff and, tweak a little bit about the different laws of physics out there. So, why not? This has been Moonstruck right here on Riot Radio. We're out.